Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be discussing the Revenge of the Island cast, which I am happy about. I had my entire script ready to read, but right before recording this, it got erased. So I'm just going to F it and wing it. Hopefully, I don't screw up way too much. So here we go. So at last, I have Stacie, and I almost did not put her in last due to one reason. So strategically, she didn't have a strategy. She didn't even think about the game or any of the nuances relating to the strategy of the game whatsoever in her one episode. Socially, she was horrendous. She never actually listened to people with what they were saying, and she just kept on talking about her supposed family members being a lot more interesting than she is. But in general, she lacked a lot of social cues. When it comes to the one challenge she did partake in, I don't remember her doing badly, but I don't really remember her doing much at all. When it comes to luck, I do think Stacie was unlucky because the toxic rats won the first challenge. Like, she shouldn't have been booted first, period, because they won the challenge. That's the only reason why I debated with moving her up a spot or two. But in general, she just handled things horribly. So at 12th, I have Dakota, and I almost put her at 13th instead. Dakota didn't have any strategy. She was on the show to get attention and press from the paparazzi. She never thought about the game at any point in the series, so yeah. I will say that when she did return, she was able to get into a voting block with Mike and Cameron, so it showed that she wasn't completely useless in this element. When it comes to challengers, I think she might be worse than Stacie, especially with how she performed in episode 2 and how easily distracted she gets. Though she did help them knock down the totem pole in the first episode. When it comes to her social game, it was pretty awful. She didn't care about talking to anyone, really. And she started bonding with Sam after she was booted, not while she was in the actual game. She tried to get close to Zoe, but she mainly did it so she would make Zoe feel like Zoe is indebted to her and not in a genuine way. I did mention how she was able to get in decent terms with Cameron and Mike while being Dakota Zoid, but I think that's mainly due to them wanting Scott out more than caring about Dakota. Dakota was lucky in the fact that she was allowed to return to begin with. If Anamaria didn't quit, she would still be a second boot, and I think she might have been even worse than Stacie. So at 11th, I have Dawn, and I don't know if I'm going to put her in the bad tier or the unlucky / potential tier. So Dawn obviously had no strategy entering the season, as she thinks the entire point of the game is that it's very perverse and exploitative. She does have great intuition and she knows how to read people, but she never uses it to her advantage socially or strategically. Speaking about social skills, it wasn't very good. We know that she's a very nice and caring person, but she's never able to cause people to ease their doubt on her, and they always see her as this weird, creepy girl that they keep at arm's length. There are moments where she does seem like she's fine with Lightning and Brick at times, so she wasn't completely awful socially. I just think she's someone that you take a while to warm up to, and sadly she didn't get that time. When it comes to challenges, Dawn was kind of mediocre. I remember her doing her part in episode 2 and episode 5, but she was the first person from her team out in episode 4, so she's just not memorable when it comes to challenges. When it comes to luck, I do think she was slightly unlucky, as Scott had to overhear what Dawn said at a confessional, which, one, that shouldn't be allowed, and two, he didn't know that she was going to go into the confessional to talk about him. And for most of the episode, he was targeting Brick, and this is the reason why Dawn got targeted. If this doesn't happen, Dawn probably lasts quite a bit longer. So while she is unlucky and did have potential, there are elements to her game that were pretty bad. Overall, I'm kind of mixed on her overall. So at 10th, I have B. While I'm unsure about what tier to put Dot in, I am confident that B is in the unlucky slash potential tier. Obviously, he doesn't speak, so we don't really know what his strategy is. But we do know that he's a team player, and he just wants to do the best he can for the people around him, and himself as well, of course. Socially, he obviously isn't great because he doesn't speak. And that's a huge hindrance no matter what people say. When you don't speak, certain nuances and certain ways of communication just isn't there, so people don't get close to you. Despite this, he is able to be close to Don, and it seems like his tribe mates do generally get along with him well enough. When it comes to challenges, he's amazing. He is the reason why the Toxic Rats are able to get a lead in the first episode, which they technically won, though they ruined the cabin, so it was taken away. And he helped his team out in his last 2 episodes as well. Scott saw his potential in challenges, which is why he was sabotaged. When it comes to luck, I do think he was slightly unlucky because Scott randomly framed him in the challenge, and he used the ice to reflect, to melt everything, and it was made to look like B did it. But at the same time, B didn't defend himself, he didn't communicate, which we know he did because he screams when he's booted, but B never really went out of his way to defend himself. Well, I don't think he's a bad player generally. I can't put him any higher. And him and Don were booted for a plot convenience. But I felt like he made less mistakes than she did, hence him being higher. These next 3 people are very interchangeable. And even up to this moment, as I'm recording this, I don't really know where I'm going to rank the 3 of them. But for now, Brick is at 9th. So Brick obviously does have a strategy coming into the season. He wants to be the leader, he wants to win using morals, he was all about teamwork, and all the stuff he's taught in the military, he wants to execute on Total Drama Revenge of the Island. It sometimes works, and it seems like his team does relatively respect him, but at other times it doesn't work. We start to see this in the final episode where his code means more than winning, and it eventually gets him the boot, especially because he feels like in episode 4, where he lost his code, it wasn't worth it. Socially, I feel like Brick is kind of good, but he also stumbles at times. Like I mentioned earlier, it seems like everyone on his team relatively enjoys his company. Him and Joe does have a banter, but I don't get the feeling that they outright hate each other. And even Anamaria defended him, despite not thinking that he's attractive in any way, saying that he's still a person. When he is swapped over to the Toxic Rats, he does have a bond or a camaraderie with Scott and Lightning, as they're the cool, muscular dude bros. And that does work for that episode. When it comes to challenges, I feel like Brick has his strengths and weaknesses. We do know that he is one of the strongest people on the show, and he's generally second to Joe, or maybe third to Joe and Lightning. He does his part in every single challenge, and I don't really remember him outright flopping until the final episode where he actively chose to not complete the challenge so he could save Mike, Zoe, and Cameron. He did his part well in episode 5, episode 6, and even in episode 3. Overall, he's a decent to good competitor. I think his issue is that he stumbles based off his code. When it comes to luck, I don't think Brick was unlucky. Technically, in episode 4, he wasn't getting voted out and he chose to quit. So the fact that he was swapped might have been luck-based, but he would have been safe anyways. Overall, I think Brick has a lot of characteristics that would make a good player, but he stumbles himself due to his clumsiness and being very insecure, and obsessing about his code way too much to the point where it actively deteriorates his game. In my opinion, I feel like if he had this large and in charge mentality throughout most of the season, he would have done a lot better. So at number 8, for now, I have Sam, and I'm still very unsure about his placement. So when it comes to strategy, Sam is a gamer, so obviously he's entering the season with the win, 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 play, 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 play like a warrior, play like a soldier, kick, A, double dollar signs, pretty much. He does execute it well enough in episode 4, almost well in episode 6, and he just seems like he's embracing the experience. Overall, it's not his strongest suit, but you know where his mentality is at when it comes to strategy and how he wants to play in the season. Socially, Sam really isn't good. I mean, he does bond with Dakota, but that was after Dakota was booted. He voted on the wrong side in episode 2, and he really just seems like he's there. But I will say that Sam isn't an obvious outcast on his team, like Stacie, B, and Don was. And even Dakota was a huge outcast on the Toxic Rats. So Sam was able to kind of blend in. I feel like when Brick swapped over, Sam became a clear outcast because he isn't a muscly dude bro like Brick, Scott, and Lightning was. So in episode 6, you could see how much he stood out. Sam benefited from there being other outcasts on the team. When it comes to challenges, Sam was actually pretty good in challenges. I was actually very shocked. One of the 2 challenges that the Toxic Rats won was due to Sam, as Sam in episode 4 single-handedly won the challenge, despite Scott working really hard to throw it. Episode 6, he almost wins the challenge and he lasts longer than all of the others, but of course he loses, so he ends up going. When it comes to luck, I don't really know if Sam benefited from luck or not. Like with Britt switching over to the Toxic Rats, let's just say if Anamaria, Mike, Zoe, or Joe switched over, maybe Sam would have lasted around longer because the dude bro elements in episode 6 wouldn't have really existed. But even that is kind of a stretch. I don't know. Overall, Sam's pretty mediocre, but I have him right now above Brick because I feel like he made less mistakes. There is potential there, but he's kind of unfocused and he needs to polish himself a lot more. So, at a very, very, very light 7th place is Anamaria, and she makes the final person in the mediocre tier. Like the last 2 people I discussed, I'm very iffy about her player. I'm very iffy about her ranking because Anamaria is like a huge question mark. When it comes to strategy, Anamaria doesn't have a strategy. She doesn't really think much about the game overall, and she kind of doesn't have to because she's on the winning side, the winning team for essentially the entire time she's on the season. When she tries, she wants to win, she wants to do well, but she gets very unfocused, which is why she isn't higher, and she ultimately quits due to her unfocus. When it comes to her social skills, they aren't good. She is very abrasive. She can come off as quite rude and cold, but at the same time, she isn't an absolute whore to deal with, and there are times where she is working with the others. I do think she benefits from Joe being on the Mutant Maggots because Joe makes Anamaria look a lot better in that element. She does start to warm up to people like Cameron, and she even defends Brick, who she doesn't care for at all, claiming that he's still a person and doesn't deserve to be treated like he's nothing. So there are good sides to Anamaria, and she only fights and argues with people when she's generally attacked or provoked. It's rarely, if ever, like she's just outright bullying or harassing people like Joe and Scott does. When it comes to challenges, Anamaria is actually very good at challenges. Obviously, in the beginning of episode 3, she doesn't really try, but when she's motivated via Joe insulting her, Anamaria does very well in the Ice Ice Baby challenge. Anamaria does well in episode 2 during her part in the challenge. She makes it to the very end in episode 4 and is able to solve a clue for them while manipulating Vito to accomplish the challenge. She does her part in episode 5, and the statue that causes them to win in episode 7 gets stuck in their hair. Anamaria isn't bad at challenges, but the issue is she's not very focused. When it comes to luck, Anamaria somewhat benefits from luck. In episode 4, the mutant man lose the challenge, and we don't really know who's voted out or who is most likely to be voted out. And I think Anamaria does have a chance of getting voted out here. But looking through it, I think Joe has a bigger chance of getting booted instead. We do have to discuss her quit, and I know some people feel like it's unfair, but I kind of don't. She actively chose to quit, and if she didn't quit, obviously she makes it an episode longer. Anamaria did change her mind about quitting, and Chris should have let her off, so I guess that's the debate about whether it's unfair or not. And Ezekiel bringing her the diamond is an outside influence that has nothing to do with the game. But I still think that she made that choice and she has to live by it. And even if she didn't quit, I'm pretty sure Anamaria only gets booted in episode 8 anyways. Because Scott still has his idol, and the Triangle don't really care for her at this point anyway. So Anamaria was running out of time anyways. Overall, she's just kind of mediocre. So I have Joe at 6th place, and she's in the solid tier. When it comes to strategy, Joe is one of the few who has a coherent strategy and plans to execute it from beginning to end. Joe is of course about winning and leadership, though she does it in a cutthroat manner and doesn't really care about anyone else. Joe does go out of her way to make alliances, but all of her alliances are short-lived, and she plans it that way. It seems like she wants to align with Brick in the beginning, but that never really goes anywhere. When she is swapped, she aligns with Lightning, but then turns on him at the final 6, which is a very horrible idea, and it led to her getting the boot. Joe forces Cameron to get into an alliance with her, and plans to cut him too, but that ended up backfiring, and he ends up outplaying her. I feel like Joe has a lot of great ideas and knows what to do, but she always jumps the gun too early, which is why her strategy, while solid on paper, is never really executed well. Joe is atrocious socially. Like, once you make Anamaria look like the better person on a team dynamic, that isn't a good idea. Unlike some antagonists like Alejandro, Scott, and even Heather to some extent, Joe does not let up, like, at all. Like, she doesn't even pretend to be nice to gain allies. I do think that her bossy attitude in episode 4 would have caused her to get booted had Brick not sacrificed himself. But yeah, Joe's just I think Joe's one of the worst socially throughout the entire season. She does reveal to have some insecurities with her femininity and sexuality, but that's never really delved upon, and she never uses it to bond with people. And I don't think she intended to use it to bond with Lightning either. Joe needed a lot of work to be done to be efficient socially, and she should have learned a few cues from Scott, where being yourself is fine, but to have some sort of social grace at times. Joe is actually very, very good at challenges, and she's one of the most consistent performers throughout the entire season. She is the most physically fit person on the entire cast, and she always ends up being first in the physical elements. She actually is somewhat of an efficient leader, as her throwing Cameron did cause them to win in episode 5, and she helped Lightning win in episode 8. Joe never screws up when it comes to the challenges. Luck, I do think Joe benefited from luck, which is why she's docked a few points. I do believe she would have been booted in episode 4 had Brick not quit, but even if she was booted, it would have been a reward challenge anyways, and she would have just been swapped over. So either way, she benefited from luck. And I do believe that if episode 9 was a normal vote, Joe would have been voted out at 6th instead of 5th. So Joe needed some things outside of her control to get her to 5th place. So at number 5 is Mike, and I'm going to put him in the good there. On paper and on execution, his game is actually very great, but I'm putting him in the good territory because the things that made him great at the game were mainly due to his multiple personalities and nothing Mike himself did. So when it comes to strategy, Mike didn't have a strategy. Mike didn't really have much thought about the game overall until his last 2 episodes. But I will say this about his last 2 episodes. In episode 8, he's able to get Cameron and Dakota on his side to have enough votes to vote out Scott. So he does have some maneuvering gameplay wise. It's just said that we don't really get to see much of it throughout the season overall. But in general, he was in a good position for essentially the entire season, as he was on the winning tribe and had enough allies and friends that would have kept him safe. When it comes to socially, he was okay to good socially. Obviously, he had Zoe. He became friends with Cameron throughout the season. He was shown to have some respect for Brick. As Brick was being booted, he saluted him, so there was a respectful camaraderie there. But I don't remember Mike himself really interacting with anyone else. He was just kind of neutral overall. Of course, Anamaria liked one of his personalities, Vito, but that's something completely different. When it comes to challenges, Mike's personalities are good at challenges. Whether it's Chester throwing the rock that caused the laser squirrel to shoot down their totem pole in episode 1. Svetlana helping them in episode 5 and episode 2. Manitoba helping them out in episode 7. So on and so forth. So Mike's personalities help the Meet Mike get a lot when it comes to their winning streak. But Mike himself, there really isn't much to say. And that's kind of the problem I have with him. Mostly everything that's good about Mike overall is due to his personalities and not Mike himself. I don't believe Mike benefited from luck whatsoever because he was on a winning tribe, he was safe the entire time. There's no way he was going to go home in the first 8 episodes. So there's nothing for him to need luck. There's nothing that would cause Mike to need luck. I would say that he was very unlucky because in his 9th and final episode, which is the merge episode, the writers had the winner of the challenge be the sole vote because they knew there was no other way that would convincingly have Mike be booted at 6th place if it was a normal vote. So Mike's forced to help Scott out in the challenge, and that is a flaw that I will give Mike because Mike, keeping his personality disorder a secret, gave Scott more power, but if he told Zoe himself, Scott would have no leverage. So anyways, Scott had to conveniently win the challenge and had to conveniently be the one vote to boot Mike. Because if it was a normal vote, Mike would have lasted a lot longer and there's no way he would have gotten 6. So overall, good on his own, but whatever made him great was due to his personality, so I kind of had to dog him there. At number 4, I have Scott, and I go back and forth with placing him at 3rd or 4th. So when it comes to strategy, Scott, of course, had a linear strategy that he plotted and executed from beginning to end. He wanted to throw challenges to get rid of the threat on his team while giving the opposite team a false sense of security. While this does work mainly in challenges episodes 3 and 5, it also failed in episode 4, and in episode 2, they did lose the challenge, but it had nothing to do with Scott's throwing. So overall, I feel like Scott was pretty successful with his strategy, especially throughout the first 7 to 8 episodes. He played great strategically in the first 7 to 8 episodes, but there were also his last 3 episodes which I find to be pretty awful. While his move to get rid of Mike was a good one, he used all of his strategic capital to pull it off, and it kind of ruined anything else that he could have done in the future after that. Scott was pretty much a dead man walking for his last 2 episodes. No one trusted him, no one wanted to work with him, and he became way too laser focused on Zoe to the point where he lost sight of what was going on with everyone else in the game. Overall, he played a solid to good game that kind of flatlined as he reached the end. Socially, honestly, I don't really think Scott was bad socially. Everybody knew he was kind of slimy and he was very hard to deal with, but people didn't hate him for the first half of the season, and they still found him dealable to work with. I do think he kind of benefited from there being a lot of oddballs and outcasts on the mutant maggots that cost more attention to themselves, and Scott wasn't too incompetent to the point where people would get rid of him for being poor in challenges. He's able to convince his entire tribe to vote out people like B and Don, even though they didn't really do anything to their teammates earlier, which showed that he does have a good enough social capital to convince people to do whatever he wanted. He is also able to get Zoe on his good side after he is swapped to the mutant maggots throughout episode 7 and episode 8. They're even on good terms in episode 9 before he, of course, boots Mike. So Scott has some capabilities socially. When it comes to challenges, it was Scott's intention to throw challenges and to look weak, but not too weak, and I think he pulled this off excellently. Of course, he couldn't stop Sam from winning the challenge in episode 4, but I already mentioned beforehand the successful attempts that he did have at throwing challenges. He did start to turn it up like in episode 9, so it did show that he was capable of winning challenges too. And it seemed like he actively tried in episode 6. Overall, Scott wasn't great in challenges, but he intended to not be great at challenges either. And he was also effective in not looking very weak. I do think Scott benefited from luck, which is why he isn't any higher. While his moves to boot B and Don were good, I do feel like there are slight plot contrivances that were used. Like him knowing how to laser beam to melt the entire ice shelter in episode 3, and him conveniently hearing Don talking about him in the confessional. It was the same critique that I gave against Alejandro when he conveniently heard and saw what Noah said about him through the camera in episode 13 of World Tour. Scott technically was booted in episode 8, but everybody knew about the immunity idol from the beginning of the season, and it was fair game, which he found fair square. I did mention in Joe's section that if the final 6 was a normal vote out, things would have been differently. I believe if Scott won in episode 9 and it was a normal vote, Mike would have stayed and Joe would have been booted. And I don't see Scott winning in the final 5, meaning that he would have been booted at number 5 instead of 4th place like he was in canon. So he did have some luck to make it as far as he did. In 3rd place, I have Zoe, and I find that to be somewhat underwhelming. Zoe's purpose for coming on the show is to make friends and to interact with many new people. Strategically, there isn't much to talk about. She's on the winning tribe, and she's in a good position throughout the mutant maggots throughout the entire time of the pre-merge. She trusts Scott, and then she gets mad at him for booting Mike, and then her only strategic moments throughout the season is her being obsessed with booting Scott in the merge. Which, yeah, it's a good move, but she didn't even see the bigger picture, as I mentioned for Scott, so her strategy was kind of underwhelming. She does successfully boot Scott, and in the final 3, she starts becoming more Joe-like, only to break out of it, which I guess could be a good or a bad thing, because being Joe-like didn't even work for Joe. But it made her more focused on the game, which was refreshing to see. Socially, Zoe was great. The only person who really disliked her was Anamaria because they liked the same person, or who they thought was the same person, and Scott, who only reacted to Zoe because Zoe was mad at a move Scott made. And even they got along for a good while. She respects Brick, she becomes friends with Cameron. Obviously, she and Mike are good. Dakota wants to be friends with her. And honestly, I don't even think Joe rips on Zoe like she rips on everyone else, which I think says a lot about Zoe socially. She's well positioned throughout the entire season, though I don't think she went out of her way to do that, but the fact that she was so well positioned speaks volumes. I honestly don't remember Zoe in the challenges. Either she needed to be saved by Mike or she was just kind of mediocre in all of them. She really never had any standout moments, which is very ironic comparing to how she would do in All Stars. But I guess being mediocre at best isn't an awful thing as being outright bad. So, yeah. Zoe didn't benefit from luck because she was well positioned throughout the entire season, and her boot in the final three wasn't being unlucky. Because if you look at the previous final threes, there was no vote. Heather was automatically eliminated in Island, Owen was disqualified in Action, and Cody was eliminated in World Tour due to losing a tiebreaker. Lightning being the sole vote made sense, and obviously he was going to boot Zoe since she was a stronger player. Overall, Zoe played a good game, but there's nothing that interesting or great about it. She didn't actively use her social game to improve things. She didn't really need to pivot, and it wasn't like she was great in challenges or strategy to overcome it. Overall, still good. At number 2, I have Lightning. I was going to put him number 1, but then I went back and forth about it, and I feel like number 2 is a good spot for him. The only thing we know about Lightning strategically is that he wants to win. Which, of course, doesn't go well because he's on the losing Toxic Rats. So that didn't go well. Once the merge happens, he does very well. Actually, no, not even in the merge. Once the swap happens, he starts performing better and better, as him and Joe are both very strong competitors. They were about to win in episode 7 before Brick screwed it up. They won in episode 8. Lightning was technically second, I believe, in episode 9. And didn't know that Chef added another round that wasn't supposed to be added. He was supposed to win episode 11 before Cameron stole his immunity from him. And he won episode 12. So, once Lightning was able to be on his own, and not held down by poor teammates, he started performing very well. And so his strategy kind of did pay off. I already kind of covered his challenges already, but the Toxic Rats never really lost due to anything Lightning did. So I don't blame him for their losing streak at all. He is the strongest or second strongest member of the cast overall, and he relies on his brute strength and athleticism, which works for him. Socially, Lightning doesn't really have any friends, but he doesn't really piss anyone off either, and he's never targeted throughout the entire season. We see him have moments with Dawn where they are cool with one another. He bonds with Brick and Scott in episode 6 as they're the manly men. And he ends up bonding with Joe throughout episodes 7 to 9 before she turned on him, so he is capable of nurturing relationships. Him and Cameron even start to bond throughout episode 10 and 11 before Cameron steals his immunity, and that causes to go haywire. So Lightning is capable of pivoting and positioning himself between different people and getting along with different people for a motive. Lightning never needed to benefit from luck because he was always in a good position throughout the entire season. Despite being on the losing tribe, he's never targeted even once throughout the season, which I do find impressive. And they didn't need any plot contrivances or producer outside influence to keep him in the game. So he made it to the end solely based off his own gameplay, which is why I have him here. At the same time, he didn't really grow strategically or work to improve on his skills throughout the season, which is why I only have him as second and not first. So at number one is who most people consider to be the winner of the season in Cameron. So strategically, he didn't really know much about what he was doing at first, but as the game went along, he started learning more and more and more, which I think is why I appreciate his journey throughout the season. He starts making friends, he starts learning stuff about other people. Him and Mike end up aligning. They successfully have enough votes to get out Scott, and they're the first to really do something about Scott. Of course, the idol happened. He realizes that Joe's using him throughout the season, especially once the merge hit. But he double-crossed her and sent her home in a move which even caused her to be impressed with him. He latched onto Lightning in the Final Four challenge and stole his victory, which, while cunning, was actually very smart. And then he ended up winning the season. So overall, he grew into his own strategically. Socially, he wasn't that good because he didn't know how to interact with people and he lived in a bubble. But like I mentioned earlier, he started learning more and more about how to deal with different people, like Anamaria, Joe, Scott. He became friends with Mike and Zoe. He even had an appreciation for Brick, to the point where everybody in the entire cast, but Joe really, and maybe Scott, was rooting for him. So he definitely improved socially as well. Challenges, he did do pretty well in the challenges. He won the challenge for the Mutant Megans in episode 2. He was one of the last remaining members of the Mutant Megans in episode 4. Joe threw him to the bell ringer in episode 5 and caused them to win there. I'm trying to remember. And then he started winning more and more competitions as the merge came along. So while he was the best at challenges, he was actually pretty good. And he used his brains for most of it. When it comes to luck, Cameron might have been the first boot if the Mutant Megans kept their loss in the first episode, but it could have easily been Anamaria. But we don't really know who was at the bottom of the tribe at the first episode anyway, so it's something that could be relatively overlooked. Other than that, I don't really remember a case where Cameron needed luck. So his game is realistic and repeatable and replayable and reliable, so I feel like Cameron deserves the number one spot. This is the first time where I've had the most common winner being at the number one spot, and I think it's because he actually grew as a player and he didn't need to rely on stupid contrivances or producer bias, so Cameron is number one. So here's my tiers ranking, and I'm actually kind of shocked that it's pretty close to the actual boot order of the season, which is a good thing because it means that the gameplay in this season didn't have to rely on stupid plot armor and producer convenience or a bunch of outside influences, meaning that it's very realistic to how a reality TV show season of this caliber would run. So I got 4 done, and there's 2 more to do. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.